She said we were strong enough to survive anything, but love isn't strength when trust is what breaks down. I still remember the first time I saw her, not in the cinematic way people describe love at first sight, but in the quiet, disarming kind that sneaks up on you mid-sentence. It was late autumn, the kind of season that carries its own hush, when even the air feels like it's holding its breath. She was standing by the window of the studio, reviewing notes for a campaign I was helping on, sunlight brushing against the side of her face, catching strands of her chestnut hair. She wasn't trying to be noticed, but somehow the room tilted slightly in her direction. She was older, not by decades, but by enough years that her calmness felt earned. While most people my age spoke quickly, eager to fill silence, she seemed comfortable inside it. Every word she spoke landed carefully, as if she understood the weight of being heard. I remember thinking she moved like someone who had already survived heartbreak and learned to carry it with grace. Our work kept us close, long evenings spent over drafts and coffee that went cold faster than we could drink it. We laughed easily, though there was always something beneath her laughter, a hint of distance, a story she wasn't telling. Sometimes, when the office emptied, I'd catch her looking out the window, her expression softened by thought. And sometimes she'd catch me watching her, and her lips would curve, not into a smile exactly, but something gentler, like understanding. The first touch wasn't intentional. We both reached for the same pen, and our fingers brushed. It was nothing, really, except that I felt it all the way up my arm. She froze for half a heartbeat before continuing as if it hadn't happened, but I caught the faintest breath she took, the kind people draw when they're steadying themselves. From then on, the air between us changed. Not charged, not forbidden, just quietly aware. I began noticing the little things, the way she'd tuck her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, the way her perfume lingered after she left the room, like rain on warm stone. She never flirted, never crossed lines, but there was something undeniably there. Maybe it was the way she listened when I spoke, really listened, eyes steady, as though every word mattered. I didn't know what to call it then. Connection, admiration, longing. All I knew was that the nights we worked late started to feel less like overtime and more like something I didn't want to end. When she laughed, I wanted to be the reason. When she grew quiet, I wanted to know why. Looking back, that was the beginning, not of love, not yet, but of something that made me see the world a little differently. She was the calm in a life that had always felt too loud. And even though I didn't know it then, that calm would one day be the silence that hurt the most. It didn't happen suddenly. There wasn't a single day I could point to and say, that's when she started to leave. It was more like a slow fade, a soft withdrawal so subtle that at first, I thought I was imagining it. Our late nights at the office grew shorter. Her texts, once playful and full of small jokes, became polite and practical. Got your email. Let's finalize by tomorrow. The warmth between the lines, the part that always made me smile, had gone missing. At first, I told myself she was just busy. She had a lot on her plate, she always did. But then came the silences. The kind that stretched too long between messages. The kind that felt like an answer in itself. One morning, we sat across from each other in the small cafe we used to go to after meetings. It used to be our spot, quiet, tucked in a corner, smelling faintly of roasted beans and old wood. She stirred her coffee absently, eyes on the swirling cream instead of me. I remember asking lightly, "You okay? You've seemed far away lately." She looked up, and for a second I thought she'd laugh it off, the way she used to when I worried too much. But instead, she smiled, that careful, measured smile people use when they're about to say something they've already rehearsed. "We're just in different stages, you and I." Different stages. The words hit harder than I expected. Not because of what they meant, but because of how softly she said them, like a verdict whispered instead of declared. I tried to reason, to bridge whatever invisible distance had formed. "Stages don't have to matter," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "We're the same when it's just us." She shook her head slowly. "That's exactly the problem," she murmured. "It's never just us." There it was, the truth she had been holding back. The unspoken fear of what people might think, of what it meant for her to care about someone younger. I saw it in the way she kept her eyes on her cup, not me. Guilt, fear, maybe even shame. Outside, rain started to fall, soft and rhythmic against the window. I watched it instead of her because I didn't know what else to do. She reached for her coat, fingers trembling slightly, and whispered, "You'll understand one day." I wanted to tell her I already did, that love wasn't something you explained, it was something you stayed for. But the words caught in my throat, tangled in pride and hurt. When she stood to leave, I half rose from my seat, as if my body was still trying to stop what my heart already knew it couldn't. She smiled once more, small, apologetic, and walked out into the rain. I sat there for a long time, staring at the half-empty cup she'd left behind, watching the steam fade into nothing. That was the last time we shared a table. The last time her voice sounded like warmth instead of distance. And just like that, the woman who once felt like home started becoming a memory. Silence has a sound. It's not the absence of noise, it's the echo of something that used to be there. That's what those months felt like after she left. A room still holding the shape of her laughter, a life rearranged around her absence. At first, I tried to keep busy. Work helped. Deadlines, meetings, coffee-fueled nights, all the things that used to blur together now served as distraction. But no matter how much I filled my schedule, there were these small, unguarded moments, a song on the radio, the smell of coffee, a particular time of day when the light hit the window just so, when she'd appear in my mind, uninvited and too vivid to ignore. I told myself I'd get over it. That what we had wasn't even defined, no labels, no promises. But hearts don't always care about definitions. They remember the small things, the way her voice softened when she said my name, the quiet between us that somehow felt full instead of empty. Weeks turned into months. We still moved in similar circles, and sometimes I'd hear her name mentioned casually, a project she was leading, a trip she'd taken, a talk she'd given. I'd nod, pretending it didn't stir anything in me. But then one afternoon, fate decided to be cruel. I saw her at a bookstore downtown, in the same corner we'd once wandered together, laughing over poetry neither of us really understood. She looked the same and somehow different. Her hair was shorter, neater. She carried herself with that same quiet confidence, but there was a hint of tiredness behind her smile. She didn't see me at first. She was with someone, a man around her age, maybe older, and she was laughing, that soft, graceful laugh I'd missed like air. I froze between aisles, pretending to browse while every part of me begged to turn away. I told myself I should be happy for her. That maybe she'd found the peace she couldn't with me. But watching her, I realized it wasn't jealousy burning in my chest. It was the ache of knowing she moved on while I was still carrying what we'd never said. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, city lights spilling across the floor. I tried playing music, but everything sounded like her. I tried writing, but the words wouldn't come out right. Even sleep felt disloyal, like closing my eyes meant letting her fade further away. Sometimes I'd scroll through old messages, the jokes, the half-finished conversations, and wonder at how ordinary they looked. How something that once felt infinite could shrink down to a few lines of text. People told me I'd forget her. That time heals. But the truth is, time doesn't heal, it teaches you how to live with the scar. And so I did. Quietly. Slowly. Pretending not to flinch when her memory brushed against my thoughts. Pretending that I didn't still look for her face in every passing crowd. Because the hardest part wasn't that she was gone. It was that she'd once been so close, and now, even silence sounded like her. It had been over a year since I last saw her. Time had softened the edges of the memory, or maybe I just convinced myself it had. I'd built a version of life that worked, busy enough to stay distracted, calm enough to seem fine. And for the most part, I believed it. Until that night. It was a charity event, the kind I usually avoided. Formal clothes, polite laughter, rooms filled with people pretending they cared more than they did. I was there for work, covering the event for a client. I didn't expect anything, especially not her. But there she was, standing near the entrance, speaking to someone in that calm, grounded way I remembered. She looked different. Her hair was tied up, revealing the lines at the corners of her eyes that hadn't been there before, and yet she carried them beautifully. There was something quieter about her now, like she'd been through storms and learned to live with the weather. For a few moments, I just watched her. The room felt louder, brighter, like everything else had sharpened in her presence. And then, as if some invisible thread tugged at her, she turned, and our eyes met. It wasn't dramatic. There was no movie-like pause or gasp. Just a stillness that felt familiar. She blinked, surprise flickering before her expression softened into something warmer. Then she smiled, small, tentative, but real. "Hey," she said when I finally walked over, her voice steady but her eyes telling a different story. "Hey," I echoed. It was all I could manage. The conversation began awkwardly, safe topics, work updates, mutual friends. But under every word was a quiet current neither of us dared to touch. I noticed her hands. She still wore the same silver bracelet she used to fiddle with when she was nervous. I wondered if she remembered that I'd noticed before. Someone passed by and complimented her on the speech she'd given earlier. She thanked them, and when she turned back to me, there was a flicker of embarrassment in her eyes. "I didn't think you'd be here," she said softly. "I didn't think you'd be," I replied, and she laughed, that same laugh I thought I'd forgotten the sound of. It wasn't loud or forced, just easy, familiar. For a few minutes, it felt like no time had passed at all. We talked like we used to, about nothing and everything, in that way two people do when the silence between them still means something. As the event wound down, people began to leave, their laughter fading into the night. She turned to me, hesitating before saying, "It's good seeing you again." "You too," I said. But I wanted to say more. I wanted to tell her how often I'd replayed that last day, how many times I'd wished she'd stayed just a little longer. Instead, we stood there for a heartbeat too long, close enough to remember, far enough to stay safe. Then someone called her name, and the spell broke. She gave me one last look, soft, uncertain, almost apologetic, before walking away into the crowd. But as she disappeared through the doorway, I knew something had shifted again. The silence she'd left behind didn't hurt this time. It hummed. Because for the first time in a long while, I realized the story between us wasn't finished, just paused. It was almost midnight when the event ended. The hotel lobby had emptied out, leaving only the hum of the air conditioner and the echo of distant laughter fading into the night. I was about to leave when I saw her again, standing outside the glass doors, her coat drawn close, her phone in hand but her attention somewhere far away. For a moment, I hesitated. Then, before I could talk myself out of it, I walked over. "Need a ride?" I asked quietly. She turned, surprised, then smiled that soft, careful smile I'd come to recognize. "You still do that?" she said. "Do what?" "Show up when I don't ask, but somehow when I need it." Her tone wasn't teasing. It was honest. Maybe even grateful. So I offered to walk her to her car, and she nodded. We stepped out into the night together. The city was half asleep, streetlights casting long reflections on wet pavement, the air cool with a hint of rain. For a while neither of us spoke. The only sound was our footsteps and the occasional car passing in the distance. "You look good," I said finally. She smiled faintly. "You always say that when you don't know where to start." She wasn't wrong. I laughed softly, shaking my head. "Then help me out. How do I start?" She looked down, exhaled slowly, and said, "Maybe by letting me apologize." The words hit harder than I expected. I glanced at her, her eyes fixed on the ground, her voice quiet but steady. "You don't owe me that," I said. "Yes, I do," she replied. "I disappeared. I made you feel like you were something I could walk away from when you were the one thing I couldn't stop thinking about." We stopped walking. The streetlight above us flickered, casting shifting shadows across her face. She looked smaller somehow, not in presence, but in the way people do when they're finally done pretending. "I was scared," she said after a pause. "You were younger, sure of yourself in ways I hadn't been in years. And I kept thinking people would talk, that it would fall apart the moment the world saw us." I swallowed hard. "So you left before anyone else could?" She nodded, eyes glistening. "It was easier to break it myself than wait for it to break on its own." I wanted to be angry, but I wasn't. Not really. I was just tired, of the distance, of the almosts. "You broke us," I said quietly, my voice trembling more than I wanted it to. Her lips parted, a tear slipping free before she caught it with the back of her hand. "I know," she whispered. "And I've regretted it every day since." The silence that followed wasn't cold this time. It was heavy, thick with everything we hadn't said for months. Finally, she stepped closer, her hand brushing mine, a tentative touch, light but deliberate. "We were strong," she said softly. "Stronger than I let myself believe." I looked at her, really looked, and said the words that had lived in me since the day she walked away. "Maybe we were. But not after you broke us." Her eyes closed at that, a quiet tear escaping, and I felt her hand tremble against mine. Either of us spoke again. The moment was too full, too fragile. But for the first time, we weren't pretending anymore. Under the hum of the streetlight, the truth finally stood between us, raw, unhidden, and real. After that night, it was as if the space between us shifted, no longer filled with silence, but with something uncertain and alive. We didn't plan to see each other again, yet somehow we did. A message here, a coffee invitation there. It started small, almost cautious. But every conversation lasted longer than it should have. Every goodbye lingered a little too close to staying. We told ourselves it was friendship. Familiarity. Two people catching up after lost time. But deep down, we both knew that was a lie. You can't step back into the orbit of someone who once meant everything and expect gravity not to pull. It was a Sunday when she invited me over. "Just for coffee," she'd said. I told myself that was all it would be. But when she opened the door, wearing a soft gray sweater and that faint scent of sandalwood and rain I'd never forgotten, I knew better. Her apartment looked different, fewer photos, new furniture. But some things hadn't changed. The warmth of her space. The quiet music playing from an old speaker. The small potted plant we'd once bought together still sat by the window, thriving against all odds. We sat across from each other at her kitchen table, hands wrapped around mugs neither of us drank from. The air felt thick with words waiting to be said. Finally, she broke the silence. "I've thought about that night," she said softly. "What you said about me breaking us." I stayed quiet, unsure if she wanted me to answer. "You were right," she continued. "But I also broke myself in the process. You didn't see that part." Her voice trembled slightly, and for the first time, I saw the cost she'd carried too, the quiet kind of pain that doesn't show but leaves cracks in the soul. "I didn't leave because I stopped caring," she said. "I left because it scared me how much I did." I exhaled slowly, fingers tracing the edge of my cup. "And I thought you left because I wasn't enough." She looked up at that, really looked, and the sadness in her eyes was almost unbearable. "You were enough. You just came at a time when I wasn't brave enough to believe it." That confession hung in the air, soft but shattering. I reached across the table, hesitated for a heartbeat, then let my hand rest near hers. Close enough for warmth, not quite touching. She stared at it, then placed her hand gently on top of mine. Her touch was light, tentative, as if she was afraid that one wrong move would break the fragile peace we'd found. "I don't know what this means," she whispered. "Neither do I," I said. "But I know I don't want to keep pretending it never mattered." We sat like that for a long while, no promises, no declarations. Just two people quietly untangling a knot that time hadn't managed to loosen. Outside, the evening sun dipped lower, spilling amber light through her windows. It fell across our joined hands, warm and forgiving. Maybe the world would still judge. Maybe nothing would come of this. But in that quiet room, with her fingers trembling slightly beneath mine, I realized something. Sometimes love doesn't end. It just pauses, waiting for courage to catch up. A few weeks passed after that afternoon in her kitchen. We didn't rush into anything, no grand decisions, no promises whispered too soon. It was slower this time, deliberate, like both of us were learning to breathe again. I started visiting her more often. Sometimes just to bring her coffee, sometimes to help her fix small things around the apartment she pretended didn't need fixing. We didn't talk much about us at first. The air between us was tender, as if we were both afraid to disturb the fragile peace we'd found. One morning, I found her on the balcony, tending to her plants, the same way she always used to when she wanted to clear her head. The sun was soft, still stretching across the horizon, painting her in gold. She wore an old sweater, sleeves rolled to her elbows, soil on her fingers. There was something unguarded about her in that moment, peaceful, human, real. "Need help?" I asked, stepping closer. She looked over her shoulder, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I was hoping you'd offer." I joined her, crouching beside the row of clay pots lying neatly against the railing. She handed me a small trowel and pointed to one of the larger pots. "That one's overgrown," she said. "The roots need space." I followed her lead, gently pressing into the soil as she guided me. Our hands brushed more than once, and each time, it felt like the smallest kind of miracle, not because it was new, but because it no longer carried the weight of everything unsaid. It just was. After a while, she sat back on her heels, brushing dirt from her palms. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think love had to be perfect to be worth it." She paused, glancing at me. "But maybe it just has to survive us." I didn't know what to say to that, not immediately. So I reached over, gently brushing a streak of soil from her wrist. "Maybe it already did." For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the soft rustle of leaves and the distant hum of the city waking below. She leaned back against the wall, closing her eyes, sunlight warming her skin. I found myself watching her the way I used to, not as someone I wanted to have, but as someone I wanted to understand. When she opened her eyes, they found mine. There was no question in them this time, no hesitation. Just quiet recognition. She reached out, fingers tracing the edge of my sleeve before settling against my hand, simple, steady, and sure. "We're different now," she said. "I know," I replied. "Maybe that's what makes this work." She smiled then, a real smile, unburdened. The kind that didn't belong to memory anymore, but to something being rebuilt right in front of us. As we sat there surrounded by the smell of lavender and soil, sunlight spilling across our hands, I realized something I hadn't before. Forgiveness isn't about erasing what broke. It's about planting something new in the space it left behind. And maybe, just maybe, this time, it would grow.